So Sekai Project has just celebrated their 10th anniversary of translating and publishing visual novels, among other games. They also recently released a 10th anniversary book at Anime Expo, which I paid $15, 1K15 for. But is this 10th anniversary book really worth the purchase? And is the Sekai Project 10th anniversary book as accurate as they're gonna, or as detailed as I'd like to be? Well, in this video, I'm going to just quickly go over and review Sekai Project's 10th anniversary book. So starting out, I'm just gonna just very quickly go through every single page. I'm not gonna go in detail just to save interest of time. So the front cover, we have this nice picture of their mascot Senna. That seems to be the big focus of the book, which we'll see in just a little bit. So far, this is just typical table content stuff. Little intro here, just little nice thank you message and all that stuff. Nothing too fancy. By Chris Ling, the current CEO of Sekai Project. So the the book starts with the history of Sekai Project. There's a little blurb on here that just talks about their very brief history. I'm not going to go over it, but I didn't know. One thing I didn't know was that they were apparently going to start with publishing music, but I guess that didn't go as well as they'd like. So that's kind of how they came into visual novels, and now for 10 years they've kind of just been doing that. And speaking of visual novels, they have like a little cool little abridged timeline of kind of their major releases throughout the 10 years they've been as a company. So just to not go over everything, yeah, 2013 they focused more on the music side, but their first real release was Narcissu First and Second, and was free. Well, in Economica, Necopar Volume 1, 2014. I guess they have, in addition to other visual novels, they'll talk about other little important little blurbs like Sekai Project's Japan branch. Looks like they also keep, I guess they internally keep some milestones. So, for example, they apparently sold their 1 millionth game in January 2016. There's, in addition to other visual novels they've talked about, looks like they talk about the few OVAs and the one OVA Kickstarter they did, which is the Necopar anime one. And this is the first time they mentioned the Kickstarter, which is interesting, which I'll talk about more later. They talk about stuff like Chrono Clock and even more milestones, like the 4 millionth game. They even have some of their non-visual novel games like Robbie Ribby and Project Lux. They even talk about like some of their console releases, like Magical High School Girl. I guess they also keep track of milestones related to the location, like how they're now, as of 2019, they're located in Norwalk. I'm not sure where they were before that. Uh, Mass Builders, apparently one of their biggest, most well successful actual games on visual novels. As you can see, every year has only like 2 or 3 entries, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure they have more than that, which I'll talk more about later. One interesting thing here is I do remember specifically when they got the whole thing lineup, which they announced on the internet, which was, or no, they announced 2021, which was interesting. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is for all their visual novels, they've mentioned if it was on Steam, because that's pretty clearly Sekai Project's priority, get their visual novels on Steam because that gets them high marks of sales. But interestingly, since Amatsutsumi was one of the major ones that couldn't get on Steam, they specifically have to mention GOG when they could have easily mentioned Dempasoft or their own Sekai Project store. So kind of interesting how they haven't done that yet. Yeah, but anyways, outside that, same dealio, and looks like they specifically end on May 6, 2023, which is when their 10th anniversary was. And after this is basically just a whole bunch of fan art around their mascot Senna Alzora. I mean, a lot of it does look. I mean, I guess these first few pages are their official-ish art, along with some of the history around their redesign. They even had, I guess, they had a different version for April Fools and Summer. It looks yeah. Then looks like they've had one for different anniversaries, so I'm guessing these are commissioned out fan art. And here's some more, I believe, fan art from some artists I've never heard of before. Yep, even more variants and more. Yep, and even more. And I guess this looks like it's actually a Toho character. I'm not sure what her name is, but yeah, just even more of that. And then I guess there's the Senna and Friends thing, which I guess relates to the Moe headphones design guidebook thing, which relates to the music publishing thing that they were able to do back in 2013. And then it ends with an afterword, which is kind of maybe slightly getting more real than the intro, which is they kind of mention some things like reaching the milestone wasn't like not they realize they admit that they didn't do everything that's deserving of praise and that they had some flaws and setbacks and stuff like that, and they seem like they're going to continue to keep going as long as they can. And then just a little congratulatory message at the end and ending off for the back of the book. So now that we've gone over the whole book, what are some of my thoughts as a mini review on it? In the interest of fairness, I'm gonna do some pros and cons. So first pro I think of is I do think the front art does look pretty nice. I do like the little abridged timeline format they got, where they just kind of live little. Okay, these are like our major releases and stuff like that, and I do appreciate that they were willing to admit that they're not like the perfect company thing, which is kind of being nice and reasonable, I guess. And I guess some of the fan art they have here is of their mascot does look pretty nice. Unfortunately that's where all the pros I have, and I have to start with kind of the mini cons I have. So the first issue I have is even though this is supposed to be the Sekai Project's 10th anniversary, the text is really hard to see. Like you have to really zoom in to see. Okay, this it actually says Sekai Project here, and it says 10th anniversary here, but it's all in white. So if someone were to just look at this, they might not immediately notice. It just thinks, okay, who's this girl, the blue dress that says "Our Connecting Sky"? The Sekai Project's 10th anniversary text isn't really that clear to me. You'd have to flip it over just to know what it actually is, which is I think is a personal design flaw. But honestly, the main bigger issue I have is the abridged history kind of conveniently left out a few major things. So the first thing is many people may not know Sekai Project has done quite a lot of Kickstarters in the past. So many of the series that are listed on here that had Kickstarters but weren't mentioned here for some reason include Clannad, Rewrite Plus, um, I believe a few other things like not and then there's stuff, and then actually that leads me to my next point. There's a lot of big series that straight up aren't even mentioned on this abridged list, which is kind of shocking to me. There's some that I guess are more understandable, how the Grisaya series and the muv-luv series aren't on here because they got moved to their self-publisher. They got moved to being self-published by Front Wing and Age specifically, and since those companies want to translate their own visual novels now. But when they don't even include things like the Leyline trilogy is kind of weird to me. I'm not really sure why they left that out because that kind of had a big Kickstarter and they were able to release all three visual novels. And I don't believe Leyline developers have self-published. I don't know why they would leave that one specifically out. And yeah, the next thing I can think of is, to kind of counteract the other issue about a lot of the big releases not being mentioned. I feel like they should have. I get that they wanted to abridge the release timeline to make it too long, but considering that this is a 10th anniversary, I think they would have. I don't know, at least have like maybe 3 to 5 more pages. Like even if they had to include like their bazillions of cat girl and dog girl visual novels. For example, I'm pretty sure Amairo Chocolate 1 and 2 are not on here, even though I know for sure that's like one of the ones they like. And the only Nekomimi or Animal Girls VNZ listed are Karakara and Nekopara. But yeah, there's definitely a whole bunch they haven't listed, and I can think of like a whole bunch of random smaller titles that they just chose not to. I don't know. think it would be nice to include all of them. And speaking of that, it reminds me, it seems like if visual novels had sequels, they chose not to list them for some reason. I think it would have been nice to show, like, to kind of emphasize, like, hey, we have a long working relationship with these developers. So, for example, they've only listed Necopara Volume 1 and the OVA, but they didn't list 2, 3, or 4. And that's kind of like their biggest, most selling series to date. But they also don't list some things like the 4 episodes plus the OVA and things like Watamari. Oh, I guess the Watamari's not really. I guess that's not really good. They don't release. They do have some console ports, which I guess is nice. But I think me having more of those would have been nice too. Um, and the only other thing I could think of what I would have liked is as far as the timeline is maybe earlier I mentioned the Kickstarter thing. I think they could have gone a little bit further and maybe had like a whole page of just like here are all the successful Kickstarters with the amounts and all that stuff. I get that would like maybe get into the whole legal thing with not being able to include Grisaya and muv-luv because their publishers kind of moved on from the relationship with them. And same thing with the Fault Milestone series, but I don't know. I feel like those are even if they haven't moved on. It would have been nice if they've been able to include them in the series somehow. Speaking of which, in this book that only has 30 pages, I think it's kind of silly that literally half the book is just fan art of Senna. Like, I get it, mascots are nice and all, but like that doesn't really tell us much about the having like all this fan art of their mascot is nice, but having half the book just be about them doesn't really go about their 10th anniversary. It just kind of just says, yeah, this is Sekai Project's thing. That's cool. The thing is, not a lot of people will really care, or they might not even know. So that's why I kind of brought up maybe like at least 3 to 5 more pages of the timeline would have been nice to include. Um, the last critique I could think of is even though they did talk about this afterward about how they're not a perfect company, which is a nice gesture and all, I think maybe a little bit more detail on what they screwed up in and how they plan on improving going forward would have been nice. So, for example, I know that as a company you don't want to look bad, but let's be real, a lot of people were really getting sick of the Kickstarter stuff, and I know there was like little things like how Dovak was like once the CEO of Sekai Project, but he had some social media issues that led him to being changed to a co-founder and having Chris be the new CEO instead. There's things like how they've had projects that they've announced and they couldn't get out. Like, for example, they couldn't, like, they at one point had the Ubisoft license, but obviously Nekonyan has it, but since they weren't able to get things like Draku Riot out. But there are also just random little releases that they just, for some reason, that they announced, but they just got no news and they just got removed from their timeline. So that was unfortunate. But yeah, other than that, I don't know. I guess they could have, maybe they could have had like a more of a, maybe like one more page of like a little more detail of what they do as a company and like maybe their plans going forward, like what I just said. But I don't know. That's basically it. This is a very short 30-ish page hit interview book that costs $15. Would I overall say it's worth $15? If I had to be completely honest, probably not. Like, I think I think this could be good as someone if you're like brand new to visual novels and you want to like use this book as like a little reference of like, okay, these are like the major releases that they care about to show off, and but other than that, you don't really learn too much about them besides like a little few paragraphs. So there's not really much of an anniversary thing, and I just think they could have had more releases and maybe less pages about their mascot and stuff like that. I don't know, but that's basically it. If you have any questions about this Sekai Project 10th anniversary book, feel free to leave a comment below. I'm not really sure when it will be released to the public, but it should be soon.